When it comes to anything involving creativity, people usually share very short phrases like, you either have it or you don't, I could never do that, or you can't force creativity. And I get why they say that, but I don't believe it for a second. So that's why I created this video where we're going to go through the 6 greatest myths that are involved with songwriting. Please keep in mind that this easily applies to any creative project. It's not just songwriting. Myth number 1, you're either born with it or not. This is absolutely not true. Take pretty much any single artist you can think of. I don't care if it's Beethoven or the Beatles, Michael Jackson or Metallica. The only requirement is that they wrote at least some of their own music. You can hear a progression from immaturity to maturity. In most cases, this goes from using basic chord progressions with simple melodies and cliched lyrics to using more advanced concepts and interplaying these things in a much more cohesive way whilst also applying lyrics that move you. Maybe an artist starts off and it's just chaos from start to finish. Usually those people slow down and find a way to control that chaos and make it something that is more easy to connect with. Some artists are just kind of boring and they need to add in some chaos, inject some craziness into their songs so that they can make it more interesting. Some artists, like Muse, may just throw this out entirely and kind of use each album to redefine their sound. The point is that nobody starts with a fully developed capacity for their craft. Over many years, usually decades, their skill set develops. They go through a maturation process and end up somewhere admirable. However, most of the time when their skill set is finally mature, they then get given some type of title, like that person's a creative, that person has something that the regular person doesn't, blah, blah, blah. It's wrong. That person has put in the blood, sweat, and tears and eventually received some notoriety for it. It's just ridiculously rare that people show their progress from being average to being brilliant. But all you need to do is look at their back catalogue. Their brilliance usually shines after a couple of albums of release. Myth number 2, I am not creative enough. As far as I'm aware, it's not possible to be born non-creative. I started thinking about this and I couldn't think of a single person that I have ever met or heard about that is incapable of being creative. Sure, some people are better at creative problem solving than others, and some people just seem to be connected creatively in a way that some of us aren't, but it's lurking there within us all. And I think that is a purely biological reason. If we weren't a creative species, then we would not have developed to the point where we are. Now, I started to dive in a lot deeper and Google, is it possible to not be creative? And I couldn't find any condition that made people non-creative. The closest thing that I could find is that when people go into a poor mental health state, so if they go through depression or they have low self-worth, that can seriously affect your capacity to be creative. But there is no mental condition that I'm aware of that would prevent you from being creative fully. If there is, it's going to be hyper-specific and affect a very small percentage of people. However, this myth is perpetuated because people attempt something creative, judge it as not good enough, and then go on to label their skills as not good enough, and in turn, do not try again. Let's be real here. Their first attempt probably wasn't good enough, but they're comparing their first attempt to someone else's years and years of development. There's an anecdote that I'm aware of. I don't know where it comes from, but I attribute it to a basketball player who basically said that of course he's better than the person who's worse than him because he's failed more times than that other player has even attempted. So if you do not attempt to be creative, you're never going to develop that as a skill. You may need to fail thousands of times before it's going to be an effective creative skill. But that's what everyone else has had to do to get there. You are creative, you just need to practice it like you would any other skill. Myth number 3, you can't force creativity. This is probably one of my favorites because I force creativity all the time and it usually works out in my favor. William Faulkner said, I only write when I'm inspired. Luckily, I'm inspired at 9 o'clock every morning. Stephen King writes around 2,000 words or 6 pages a day. Like clockwork, he releases 2 books per year. The Gap by Ira Glass, which is a short video that I highly recommend you watching, linked below, is Ira talking about his journey through the creative process. Ed Sheeran, in a video also linked below, talks about the creative writing process where you have to write a lot of shit songs before the good songs are going to start coming out. The War of Art, Do the Work, Turning Pro, and Put Your Ass Where Your Heart Wants to Be are 4 books by Stephen Pressfield that discuss this same topic at length. You cannot be creative unless you make time and space to be creative. For me, I find that inspiration strikes usually when I'm playing around with an idea or trying to mesh 2 ideas together that I haven't heard before. Something unique comes out and then I end up being inspired to write a song about that. If I waited for inspiration, then it would strike when I'm on a train or when I'm talking to somebody and I can't leave, or when I'm in bed and just about to fall asleep and I'm too tired to get up. None of these places work for me. So what I do instead is I carve out time in my day day and make sure I sit down and do something creative. This is forcing creativity. And sure, sometimes it's really hard work. Sometimes it's really low quality. And it's not uncommon that I will delete my efforts. But it's this process of trying to solve a puzzle that has no right answers over and over and over that teaches me that when the ingredients are right, I can write a whole song relatively easily. If I didn't have the capacity to be creative, or if I didn't carve out the time and force creativity upon myself, when I stumbled across these golden nuggets, which we all do, I wouldn't have the capacity to finish a complete song. Myth number 4, alcohol, drugs, or high emotional turmoil will help your creativity. I have never found that being highly emotional or being under the influence of any substance has aided my creativity. Usually, if I've had a couple of drinks, then I will find that I'm much worse at playing guitar, I'm much worse at singing, and it's just a lot harder to do anything practical with music. I usually try for a couple of minutes and then I just give up and try again tomorrow. Anyone who says they're better when they drink is deluding themselves. It's more likely that they're using the alcohol to kind of calm down some nerves about performing live or something like that, which totally makes sense and I totally understand and get that. However, if you get the same person going to a recording studio to do their part, it's very unlikely that they're going to be drinking. Unless, of course, they've got a huge budget or they don't care to come back and do it over and over and over until their parts are right. It's just going to slow down the process, and I really, really recommend doing it while you're sober. The only argument that I think can be made for drugs or alcohol is deep reflection. So when you're in an inebriated state, there are different connections that are going to work in your brain. So it's going to be easier, say you're in the other room and listening back to your track, you can hear that like, hey, this song is just going way too long. Or, hey, this is actually perfect background music. It's not annoying. It's like whatever. And you may just listen to a thing and go, yeah, okay, this part is fucking sick and it's not going to change. Or this part's really shit and it needs to be deleted or it needs to be improved or whatever it happens to be. This is the only case that can be made for this type of inebriation. But I think that it can be done in a much easier way. My process is that when I write a song, I try and finish it as soon as possible. Then I don't listen to it for kind of a few days. Hopefully, what I'll do is write another song straight after. By the time I've finished the second song, I will have disconnected from the first song. That disconnection is going to allow me to re-experience the song as if it were the first time that I was hearing it. So there might be some parts that I remember a bit. Those parts I'll either think that they're amazing or I'll think that they're kind of crap. And when I listen back, I'll think, okay, it's not as amazing as I thought, or maybe it is as amazing as I remember. I don't know. Maybe that thing that I thought was annoying is actually totally acceptable. Who knows? But the thing is I've got this fresh perspective because I've had some disconnection to it. If you're just swimming in this one song for months at a time, you lose all objective connection to the song, and it's going to be really hard to know which song is right. In that case, sure, have some alcohol and see if it changes, but I would highly recommend just distancing yourself from the song. In terms of emotional turmoil, sure, you can write some good lyrics. Maybe you will connect a melody that's going to be really kind of beautiful and really capture your mood or a performance, but you probably need time to grieve whatever is happened. You know, maybe you've broken up. You need time to grieve the relationship. You shouldn't be trying to force creativity over the top of that emotional turmoil, because you're just then going to get yourself further down because like, great, my girlfriend just left me and I'm shit at writing songs. This doesn't help anyone. Deal with the grief, be practical. Mental health is really important. Myth number 5, you need freedom to be creative. We've all heard someone say that you need total freedom to be creative. You can't be thinking about your bills. You can't be thinking about anything. You have to have a free day to be able to do this, blah, 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 blah. Cool. That's fine, but it's not practical. I find boundaries to be extremely important in writing music. If you've got an hour before you go to work and you spend 10 minutes and you've got to write a song in that 10 minutes, you're going to find that you are creative in that time. Doesn't really matter if you use a time constraint, a scale, a pattern, a tempo, a specific lyric, pretty much anything else. It all helps you just be more creative. There's an analogy that I love, which is if you give a blank canvas to an artist and say, paint something, the first thing they're going to do is ask you what. Without knowing what you want them to paint, they could paint anything. They could paint a head of cabbage. They could paint a grubby teenager. They could paint a nebula. They could paint you. It doesn't matter. But until they decide on what they want to paint for you, it could literally be anything, and the artist doesn't know what it could be either. But once again, the artist then had to be the person making the boundary on what they were going to create before they could give you something. However, if you give an artist a blank canvas and you say, paint me a lion, they're now going to have something to work with. Maybe they'll focus on what the essence of a lion is. Maybe they'll focus on a lion in motion. Maybe they'll focus on the eyes of a lion. Maybe they'll focus on something about a lion that ends up not having any connection to a lion, in your opinion, because during the creative process, it stopped being important that that's what they were creating. It just started becoming something else. It started with the intention of a lion and ended up as something else. But who cares? It is art. It's not supposed to be anything other than exactly what it is. The same goes for your music. Slap on a new scale and see what comes out. Tune your guitar differently, or use a new tone that's unfamiliar. Try writing a song in a totally different genre that you've never tried before. Your creativity will skyrocket, I promise. Myth number 6, it's easier or harder to be creative in a group. These are two sides to the same coin. Both have advantages and both have disadvantages. I'm not really going to bang on about these ones. The point is at some points in time, you will need to be creative by yourself. At other points in time, you will need to be creative in a group. I think it's really important that you develop your skill set so that you can do it whenever and wherever, because you will be grateful for that skill later on. When you need that skill and you can call upon it in any environment, then you're going to be happy that you practiced it. So that's pretty much it for this video. I think creativity really comes down to actually sitting down and trying to create. You do that for 1,000 hours and you're going to have 1,000 hours of experience doing it. And once you've got that 1,000 hours, do you think you're going to be more creative? Do you think you're going to have a better capacity to create than someone who hasn't practiced that for an hour? Then all of a sudden you're going to be the person that's creative. Just do it. If you agree with me or disagree with me, please let me know down below. If you've got any stories about how you had an idea about creativity and then that idea was shattered somehow, please leave that below because I love learning about that stuff. Anyway, I will see you next week for more stuff about music. Goodbye.